Hi there, I'm Doreen. Today I'm going to present here the paper of Dr. Rodrigo Abenas entitled Traces of Critical Pedagogy in Results Philosophy of Education. Let's get started. Recently, scholarship is still an ongoing debate regarding the enigma of our national hero. The official doxa continuously resonates the venerated and canonized American hero who invokes and legitimizes the false charity and hegemony of the neo-colonial powers and its ideological state apparatuses. Such views and results share the prevalent discourse that he is a reformist hero who repudiated the revolution that was initiated by Katipuneros. The Filipino critical pedagogue Renato Constantino identifies it as one of the causes of our miseducation, but despite this conventional wisdom, there was still incredulity about his meta-narrative. Okay. So here it reveals that the Philippine Revolution is the antithesis of Rizal, and that Rizal is the antithesis of the Philippine Revolution. Now, this paper is attempting to answer that doxa, okay? It argues that Rizal's controversial position when it comes to bloody revolution can be reconciled through examining his philosophy in education, not only in theory, but of course we're gonna examine also his practices or Rizal's praxis. Alright? Okay. Against this, Rizal was able to formulate his own critical pedagogy ahead of its seminal architect Freire. That is why in this paper it includes also first is Paulo Freire's critical pedagogy, second, Rizal's philosophy education, and we're gonna talk about his practices also, or his praxis. And then the third, we're gonna talk about the critical pedagogy and Rizal's philosophy of education and practice. So let's talk about Paulo Freire's critical pedagogy. The term pedagogy here was used not only as a teaching method, but as social theory to highlight some dialectics of subjectivities, objectivities, freedom, and agency in the classroom everyday life. So the term pedagogy here is not anymore considered monolithic, since it has taken varied practices. He himself testifies, thought and study alone do not produce pedagogy of the oppressed. It is rooted in the concrete situation and describes the reactions of laborers, or peasants, or open, of middle-class persons whom I have observed directly and indirectly during the course of my educative work. For Freire, dehumanization is not an ontological reality but a historical one, and it is the great humanistic and historical task of the oppressed to liberate themselves and their oppressor as well. Freire pointed out here that education should be the basis of the revolutionary struggle, and it is imperative to design a pedagogy of the oppressed, so that the oppressed of today will not become the sub-oppressors in the long run. So here's the nature of the oppressors. First and foremost, they are the initiator of violence, and they consciously tend to transform the world into objects of domination because their being is having. Whereas the nature of the oppressed, their quest towards liberation, freedom, and emancipation, he recognized that there is a distortion in the society. In the struggle, they struggle against the oppressors, but with their struggle, they in turn become sub-oppressors. This happens because the oppressed had suffered cruelty. First, they wanted to be liberated. Second, there's that image of the oppressors engraved. So liberation is possible through emancipatory education. But education can be a tool for domination or a tool for liberation. As a tool for domination, it can be an ideological state apparatus, for it preserves oppression and exploitation, thereby legitimizes class inequality and social stratification. For example, the banking model of education. Banking education has like one dynamic. First is for the teacher. The teacher is the one who has the capacity to act and decide. The teachers are the depositors, the teachers are the agent. Whereas The student is a passive recipient of knowledge, meaning they're trained to be meek. The student doesn't necessarily being consulted on how best he or she can learn because everything is decided, everything is talked out. That being said, education can also be a tool for liberation. And Freire proposes here this problem posing in education as it breaks the dichotomy of teacher and students. Problem posing regards dialogue. The teachers here are recognizing that the students are fellow dialoguers. Hence, in the process, it is promoting critical thinking, it is more engaging, and it's more liberating. Now, let's talk about Rizal's philosophy of education and practice, where three studies have been made. First is the work of Oseas, which he highlights Rizal's education views using his two novels, The No Limit Tanghiri and El Filibusterismo. Second is from Kiboyan, where he highlighted the praxis of Rizal during his exile in the Pitan. And the third was done by PNU, in which they relate Rizal's view of education in relationship with the pragmatist term sociality. Now let's talk about Rizal's depiction of the late 19th century Philippine education system, which can be read in chapter 19 of our first novel, No Limitang, here entitled Aventuras de un Maestro de Escuela, that illustrated the agony of the schoolmaster. The schoolmaster here has a lot of concerns. First is the absenteeism of the pupil. Out of 200 in the list, only 25 are attending. Learners are less motivated because there are no stimulus given, there are no reinforcement nor encouragement given from the teacher. Second, there is a problem in pedagogy, the curriculum itself and the method of instruction. The students go through banking system of education will never even learn how to think independently or to think critically because what they were being told is that education or a kid education means that you are capable of reproducing a knowledge given by your teachers or reproducing the knowledge from the book itself, and no one is teaching them how to rethink the system or to critically think the injustices of the existence of the system itself. In this novel, the schoolmaster has this utopian idea about education, so he really tried his best to modify the old practice by abolishing corporal punishment and by creating a classroom that is free from terror or sorrow and by creating a place that promotes inquiry. However, he was being forced by the curate to do the old practice again until he lost hope. After describing the Philippine educational landscape of the 19th century using Rizal's metaphors, let us now proceed into how T. Rizal depicted the 19th century Philippines, using his second novel, El Filibusterismo. During his time, Rizal described the Philippine social structure as that of the boat or the vapor tabo as the Philippine society itself, and then the boat's captain or the Capitan del Barco as the Governor General, and the two classes existing at that time, the lower class and the upper class. Rizal shows here that the Philippines during this time was run by friars and other illustrious personages. It also reveals the way of life between the upper class and the lower class. Of course, the upper class comfortably sitting on chairs and smoking cigars, while the lower class suffered oppression from abuses and malpractices. With its salient features, there were two attitudes towards changing and transforming the feudal social structure: reformation and revolution. Of course, the reformists had aimed for Hispanization and assimilation. However, with the realization that assimilation will not be materialized, some had fought towards a bloody revolution. Talking about Il Filibusterismo in Chapter 7, it depicts two characters, namely Basilio and Simon. Basilio here is the embodiment of the propaganda movement who advocated assimilation, and Simon is the embodiment of revolutionary struggle. Using the lips of Simon, Rizal recalled this developmental phase, saying that instead of aspiring to be a province, why not aspire to become a nation? But despite this characterization, Rizal did not agree with bloody revolution. For Rizal, violence is not transformative, but education is. That is why there is a need to learn the civic virtues to have redemption, as redemption presupposes virtue, and that virtue presupposes sacrifice, and that sacrifice presupposes love. Hence, the goal of education is to make the Filipinos enlightened and redeemed, not to make the Filipinos the tyrants of tomorrow. After articulating Rizal's philosophical view of education via using his metaphors in his two novels, it's also imperative to consider his praxis. As claimed by Kibuyan, during the exile of Rizal in the Pitan, he did what he can, and he ended up transforming his adopted town. Rizal was able to show a real model of a progressive society. With that being said, during the exile of Rizal in the Pitan, he did not only serve as its town planner, but also as a medical doctor, a school founder, a community engineer, a community scientist, a social worker, and a cooperative initiator. As a school founder, the school established by Rizal in Talisay is devoted in the pursuit of science and history. It reveals that this school is a materialization of the schoolmaster's pedagogical imagination, which we previously talked a while ago in Rizal's Nalimitanghere. That being said, Rizal was able to transform his adopted town as he built a community that is incoherent with a model of sociality, not by force, not by oppression, but through collective orientation, scientific creativity, and social entrepreneurship. After discussing Paulo Freire's critical pedagogy as well as Rizal's philosophy of education, we can infer that Rizal was against a bloody revolution because for him what is needed is to have a radical education so that the slaves of today will not become the tyrants of tomorrow. Those words had been re-echoed by Paulo Freire in his Pedagogy of the Oppressed, stating that education should be a tool for liberation, so that the oppressed of today will not become sub-oppressors later on. To end this discussion, Rizal had shown us that the real authentic struggle could be done through peaceful means, like promoting sociality, develop scientific inquiry, and develop a sustainable community through collective cooperation.